Hi everybody, here we're going to take a look at how a spring's mass and also its stiffness are going to affect the period of vibration. So what we can adjust is we can adjust first of all the mass, and if you adjust it, you can see here how the rate of vibration changes. So with the bigger mass, it vibrates more slowly, and in terms of a period, this means that it's going to have, I want you to figure this out. Does this correspond to a long period or does this correspond to a short period when you increase the mass of the spring? And the other way is, let's say that we reduce the mass. There you notice that it's vibrating faster. So in this case, does that mean that the spring has a longer period or a shorter period? And we can also do the same thing. So if we keep the mass constant and now we increase the stiffness of the spring, if we increase the stiffness, notice that it vibrates even faster. So there, when you increase the stiffness of a spring, in terms of the period, does this mean that the period is proportional to the stiffness of the spring, or is it inversely proportional? So the basic relations are, let's see here, so let's start from the beginning here. So as I increase the stiffness of the spring, notice that it vibrates faster. So in this case, does that mean that the period is proportional to the stiffness, or is it inversely proportional to the stiffness of the spring? And the other case, let's say that you have a mass now, and let's say that you increase the mass. So there, notice that it vibrates more slowly. So does that mean that the period of the spring is going to be proportional to the to the mass, to the hanging mass, or is it going to be inversely proportional to the hanging mass? So let's take a look at the answer. So now, this equation, what this shows you here is that the period t, and it shows you in this case that the period is equal to about 2 seconds, and you have the mass in the numerator and the stiffness of the spring in the denominator. So from there, what that implies, because the mass is in the numerator, if we increase the mass, and the period should get longer. So let's increase the mass, and notice that the period goes up to almost 5 here. So as you increase the period, as you increase the mass of the spring, the period is going to get longer. And the other case, let's look at what happens to the stiffness of the spring. So now if I increase the stiffness of the spring, notice that the period becomes smaller. So that means that the stiffer the spring, the smaller the period, so that the stiffness, the period is inversely proportional to the stiffness. Or an easier way to think about this is that the stiffer the spring, the higher the frequency, and the faster it's going to vibrate. And corresponding with this one here, if you increase the mass, because it vibrates more slowly, that means that it's going to have a lower frequency.